Good evening and welcome. So glad you're here. We're going to get started with our program and wonderful talk this evening. I'm Patricia McDonald, Director of the Wichita Art Museum, and so happy to invite welcome such a wonderful crowd to our talk this evening. And thank you for joining us through our back door entrance as we have construction going on. No pain, no gain, I'm told. At any rate, I think I see a nice number of familiar faces from people over the weekend. We in the building and on the staff, at any rate, are still riding high from a really extraordinary opening with our artist, Preston Singletary, and the guest curator, Miranda Bellardi Lewis. So we're back. And we're back for a talk this evening by Christina Burke, who was also here with all the rest of us over the weekend, the curator of Native American art from the Philbrook Museum of Art in Tulsa. But first, allow me a little bit for a number of acknowledgments. The exhibition Preston Singletary, Raven and the Box of Daylight was organized by the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, Washington. We're becoming great friends and partners with them. But locally, I want to acknowledge, and I see at the back of the room, our new best friends, although they've been friends for quite some time, are across the street neighbors, the Mid-America All-Indian Center. It's April Scott and Aaron Rao, who are the center director and the museum director, respectively, who help partners with opening a number of programs, certainly tonight, and really figuring out any number of things about this exhibition. So, our new, not our new friends, but our new best friends, at any rate, who have helped us. And then, so many people understood in advance of any art arriving at our door that this would be a project of real significance to Wichita. So much so that they stepped forward to contribute financially to help us make it happen. And I'm elated that occurs, that sort of spirit of generosity to the community happens in Wichita. So bear with me, it's more than 2 or 3 or 4 either companies or individuals that we need to acknowledge and thank. So our presenting sponsor for the Singletary exhibition is the F. Price Kosman Memorial Trust. That's at Intrust Bank. The lead patrons are the DeVore Foundation and Mrs. Judy Slauson. Fred and Mary Cope Foundation is a major underwriter. Charles Baker is the principal sponsor, and Emprise Bank is a substantial corporate sponsor. Generous additional support was provided by Louise Barron, the Berry Foundation, Donna Bunk, Mary Eves, Norma Griever, Dr. Dennis and Mrs. Ann Ross, Mary Sue Smith, Sarah T. Smith, the Wiedemann Foundation, Janice and Jeff Van Sickle, and Sue and Kurt Watson. And there are more. Additional exhibition patrons, very generous folks, include Dr. John and Nancy Bramer, Sharon and Dr. Alan Feary, Tony and Bud Gates, Carol and Guy Glidden, Patty Gorham and Jeff Kennedy, Sonia Greneman and Chris Brenner, Trish Higgins, Mary and Delmer Clucky, Mary Lynn and Bill Oliver, Will and Kristen Price, and then the Friends of the Wichita Art Museum and the City of Wichita help us and help with support for all the different exhibitions. So I want to ask you to applaud, in part because a nice number of the people whose names I just called out are in the room this evening. So many, many thanks to them. And Christina Burke is back. She's the curator of Native American and non-Western art at the Philbrook. As a matter of fact, we are welcoming her back from over the weekend, but we're also welcoming her back because she was a speaker here when we presented an exhibition from the Philbrook collection in 2013, and that included the 2 artists, Laura Gilpin and Maria Martinez. As a museum curator, she has quite broad expertise, and yet she's done strong research and is a real specialist in Lakota ledger drawings and winter counts. As a matter of fact, in 2007, she authored the book The Year the Stars Fell, Lakota winter counts at the Smithsonian. And really the reality about much museum work is while you have depth in a specialty, the good news is you also get to become a superb generalist. Christina has worked on countless exhibitions and worked with really incredible contemporary artists, native artists, which is why we thought to invite her back to Wichita and to speak. She spent numerous years at the Smithsonian working on projects at both the National Museum of the American Indian and the National Museum of Natural History. She was also the collection manager at the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. She is all but dissertation in anthropology from Indiana University, and she has an undergraduate degree in anthropology from the University of Rochester. I'm gonna do a shout out for a project that she's working on at the moment. She's been an advisor to an exhibition that's now on national tour called Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists, and so proud of her. She was quoted at length in the New York Times article about that exhibition. The good news for us is it's coming to Tulsa, and we all should be making summer road trips. The exhibition opens there on June 28th, and I think they keep it through like mid-September. September 20th, there you have it. So we're welcoming her to Wichita, but a little bit later, she might be welcoming all of us to Tulsa. So Christina Burke.
Thank you all very much. I don't know about you, but whenever I get up to talk, I have to have my things with me, so I feel comfortable. And like Patricia, I just have a few words before we start. First, I want to recognize the indigenous people of this area, the Comanche, Kansa, Osage, Pawnee, Tonkawa, Wichita, and other Native people for whom this has always been home. I'm really grateful to be here. I also want to thank Patricia McDonald for inviting me back. I'm thrilled to be here again, and Curator Tara Hedrick for being such a wonderful host, and really all the staff here at the Wichita Art Museum. I was really grateful to be here for the opening last weekend of Preston Singletary's exhibition upstairs. If you haven't seen it, go see it. And had the great good fortune to hear Preston and curator Dr. Miranda Belarde Lewis last weekend. Their talk was not only informative, but really inspirational, so I'm grateful for that. And to the folks at the Mid-America All-American Indian Center Museum, and especially Aaron, thank you so much for the drop-by tour. I appreciate it. And out of respect for everybody's time, I'm gonna set my timer so I don't go on and on and on and on. Because I could, but I actually want to start in Central America and tell you a little bit about how on earth I got to Tulsa, Oklahoma, working as a curator of Native American art. And it started from an experience when I was 5 years old. My family actually moved from the Washington, D.C. area to Mexico City for several months because of my father's work. And I had this incredible experience as a young child to go to Teotihuacan, to the city of the Aztecs, and to, at the time anyway, this is way back when you could do this, climb on the stairs of the pyramids of the sun and moon. I don't think you can do that anymore. But as a 5-year-old kid, it had a huge impact on me. I should back up and tell you that, so I mentioned my family moved to Mexico City for several months. I was 5 years old. My siblings were 8, 10, and 11. And when my mom talked to our teachers at school and said, we're going on this family trip, we don't want to be apart for that long, so we're taking the kids out of school, the teacher said, "Are you kidding me? That's a terrible idea. All of your kids are going to fall behind, but if you insist, here are their workbooks, et cetera, et cetera." So basically they required that my mother homeschool us while we were away so that we didn't fall behind. And my mother, being a rule follower, was very diligent, and so we were homeschooled for the first month and a half. We finished our workbooks, and we still had several months in Mexico City. And so my parents, who are quite adventurous, said, okay, well, now we're going to Teotihuacan, we're going to see the catacombs at Guanajuato, we're going to the Yucatan Peninsula, we're going to the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. So here, again, as a 5-year-old, I had the chance to see Teotihuacan and then go to the Museum of Anthropology, where they had a scale model of Teotihuacan, which included all these little figures wearing all this interesting clothing. And as a 5-year-old, I thought, okay, well, I've been here, and I see this little scale model with all these people wearing all these clothes, but how do we know what they wore, what they ate, how they worshiped, how they created this art? How do we know anything about people who are so distant from us in culture, in time, in geography? And it's that question that has propelled me throughout my career. When I was an undergraduate student, I had the great good fortune to have an internship, one of those unpaid internships, at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History in the summer of 1988, and I worked on this exhibition called Crossroads of Continents, which was about indigenous people of Siberia and Alaska, and those connections across the Bering Strait, historical connections, cultural, linguistic, artistic, etc. This particular exhibition had a lot of clothing in it, things like chilkat blankets from the Tlingit tribe, walrus gutskin parkas made by Inuit people of Alaska. And the first task that I was asked to do as an undergraduate student with no experience in museums whatsoever was to work with the photographer who was taking pictures of the objects for that catalog you see on the left. So my job was to take this clothing of whatever material, technique, etc., and put it on mannequins and pose the mannequins so the photographer could take the pictures that were the illustrations in this catalog. And I thought, you can get a job doing this? Museums are so cool. And as part of that experience, that was not the only thing I did at the Smithsonian, but it was one of the craziest. And one of the other crazy things I got to do was to host Native people from Alaska, from King Island, Alaska, Inuit people who had come to the Smithsonian to demonstrate traditional song, dance, etc. So here I was in Washington, D.C., having these amazing experiences behind the scenes in a museum. So I got really interested in museum work in particular, but also in Native North America. Next stop. After college, I took a gap year, as they said, which for various reasons turned into 5 years. I'm not going to tell you all about that. But during those 5 years, I actually went back to the Smithsonian and had an incredible opportunity to work with Dr. Joellen Archambault, who's a Lakota curator from the Standing Rock Reservation. And as part of that experience, we traveled out to South Dakota to do museum research, collections research, to interview Native people about all kinds of things, and actually to attend Lakota ceremonies in the Black Hills. So here you see an image of Wind Cave in western South Dakota. And I had been really interested in the Northwest Coast, but having traveled to South Dakota, I got interested in the Northern Plains, and so I gave up salmon for buffalo and moved inland, and decided when I went to Indiana University to focus on the Lakota of the Northern Plains. While in graduate school, part of my training was field work, so an extended period, about a year and a half, working at what's known as the Heritage Center at Red Cloud Indian School on Pine Ridge. So Red Cloud School, as the name suggests, was started by Chief Red Cloud, Mahbia Luta, who asked that a school be built in that reservation, in that community, to educate Lakota children about non-Lakota ways. So it was built in 1888. And in various ways and for various reasons over the years, all kinds of collections were gathered there. In the 1960s, that museum, the Heritage Center, actually started a competition, a juried competition for contemporary Native art. So their collections include both historical materials from Pine Ridge and other Lakota communities, as well as contemporary Native art from all over North America. So I had this another incredible experience working in a museum, but in a reservation community, a very different perspective than the Smithsonian, as you might imagine. And so that actually led me to my current position as curator of native art at the Philbrook in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was telling some folks earlier that I described my career, I'm sort of like Goldilocks. So I was at the Smithsonian and it was too big. And I was on Pine Ridge and it was too small. But Philbrook in Tulsa is just right. So as Patricia was saying, scholars, academics, specialists in whatever field, we get really, really focused on one particular thing, and then we get a job and we have to become generalists and know all the things. What I'm really excited about in my job and wherever I go is not just working with collections, but working with Indigenous people who come to do research of their own design. They're not just working on Philbrook projects or projects with me. On the left, Shan Gosshorn, Sarah Sentz, and Teresa Secord, who are all basket weavers, having a fabulous time back in our collections looking at these baskets. And I can't tell you how much I learn every time I invite specifically artists, but also family members, community members, back into collections to tell me about what we have. And on the right, we have a family from Hopi Pueblo. So these are siblings, Verma de Quatua, Wilmer Kay, and Carla Kay, who come from a long line of artists. Their grandmother, Rachel Lolema, was a basket weaver. Their uncle, Charles Lolema, was an incredible jeweler. Verma is also a jeweler, and Wilmer is a kachina carver. And they came to Philbrook recently and were looking through some of our museum collections in the library and the archives and behind the scenes. I love thinking about, reading about, and writing about Indian stuff of all kinds, so just a few of the things that I've done. But what I'm really interested in, as Patricia talked about, my little teeny tiny narrow of the native art world is pictographs drawn by Lakota people, and particularly those examples that have written Lakota language annotating those images. That combination of image and text and those voices recording important events from in Lakota lives, but from Lakota perspectives, I find fascinating. So just a couple of examples of the kinds of things that I have worked on for a long time and keep returning to. That's another presentation. But from that sort of little slice of the native art world, I got interested in how contemporary native artists draw inspiration from these historical forms. So in this case, for instance, this historical drawing, probably from about 1900, by a man named Amos Badhart Bull, who was on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and then a drawing from 1997 by Chuck Wilcox, kind of riffing off that, not replicating it exactly, but certainly riffing off of it, as you can see. And this particular contemporary piece, these kinds of pictographs that are put in order are known as, their sort of tribal histories known as winter counts, from the Lakota phrase, Waniatu Wayapi. They count by winters. And these kinds of documents, I have a, let's see. Here's a historical example of a winter count. And you've got all of these little images. Each one represents a memorable event from a single year. And it's the way that Lakota people not only recorded important events that affected the entire community, but it's also how they marked time and the passing of years. And it's how individuals would keep track of their age. So they might say, well, I was born the year the stars fell, 1833. And it's been, let's see, many winters since then. And that's how people would keep track of their age. But this particular example I really love, this contemporary example by Dawn Little Sky, because she has, again, not replicated a historical Lakota winter count, but is riffing off of it. So in the very middle there, you see, this is actually the Big Bang, so the beginning of the universe. We have the dinosaurs. And we have, prehistoric people hunting. Here we have Columbus landing in the New World. And more contemporary events, these are all related to World War II. So the internment of Japanese Americans, you can see them being rounded up here. Lakota people who served in the military, many of whom didn't survive. and the atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So she actually riffed off of this tradition of history keeping, but brought it into the contemporary as well. Another example, a Lakota artist, Arthur Amiot, who is the great-grandson of an artist named Stephen Standing Bear. If anyone has heard of the book Black Elk Speaks, a couple people have. Standing Bear was a contemporary and good friend of Black Elk and actually illustrated the first version of that book. So this is a photograph of Standing Bear. Here is Standing Bear and his wife, his Viennese wife, and two of their children. Standing Bear traveled to Europe with the Wild West show and either became injured or sick and was in a hospital in Vienna, Austria for so long that he fell in love with his Viennese nurse, Louise Rennick, who followed him. She left her life as a nurse in Vienna and followed him to the Pine Ridge Reservation, where he built a log cabin and she tatted lace curtains for the windows, and they raised their 3 daughters. And he was an artist and a historian, and drew pictures of events from his life, including participating in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, the Custer Battle. And they raised their family, and then generations later, their great-grandson, Arthur Amiot, does these wonderful collages riffing off of historical photographs and historical drawings, and kind of pulling them all together to tell his version of Lakota history and of his family. So I'm really interested in how contemporary artists look to the past for inspiration, et cetera. So I wanted to start, of course, with Preston Singletary. And again, how many people have already seen the exhibition upstairs? Most of you, great. Well, I wanted to make sure to sort of start this journey, now that you've heard enough about me, but start this journey here in Wichita and with this special exhibition. And looking at a historical photo of a house front and some posts from Klukwan, and to give you a sense of kind of that history and that context of where some of these contemporary artists are coming from. I also want to include some of the pieces from your permanent collection. There's a wonderful gallery upstairs, and again, I encourage you all to check it out. In particular, I love this print by Diego Romero on the left. Both he and his brother Mateo are artists. Mateo is more of a painter, and Diego does print work, but also ceramics. This is one of his ceramic pieces. And these very stark graphic images in black and white. They don't come out of nowhere, and it's not just sort of comic book features, but they come from a long line of ceramic aesthetics, going back thousands of years among the Mimbres people of the Southwest. And here are a couple of examples of some Mimbres pottery, this very bold graphic designs and elements that you can see he sort of brings up into the 21st century in his work. I was also really taken by this print, the David Bradley, and I want to emphasize that artists, no matter what their background, are always looking for inspiration and influences all over the place, not just in their own history and heritage and community, but across time, et cetera. So this particular piece, which of course is a riff off of American Gothic, right? Well, David Bradley has actually done a series of these. So here's one of an Apache couple. So there's Geronimo on the right and his wife. Here's a whole different couple. And a wannabe couple. Native artists, like any artists, are not pinned down and restricted to any particular theme, style, medium, motif, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's really interesting to look at not only what they're doing, but think about where it all comes from. And it comes from a variety of places. Some of you may have heard of the First Nations painter Kent Monkman, who's Cree. He does these riffs off of history painting. So here's his own very interesting take on Pygmalion and Galatea. And you can see in his, the sculptor is kissing this figure that is coming to life. But in his studio, we have End of the Trail. We have a shield and a bow and arrow. We've got a Northwest Coast cherub up here with that raven mask. as opposed to this artist's studio. So again, riffing off of sort of the Western canon, but from his own perspective. You might have heard of Monkman because he was recently commissioned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art to create 2 huge paintings for their Great Hall entrance. And by huge, what I mean is 11 by 22 feet. So this is a picture I took of the opening event back in December to give you a sense of the scale. And this particular one is a riff off of Washington crossing the Delaware. Instead of Washington, that figure in the middle with the flowing red scarf is Monkman's alter ego, with which he often performs, whose name is Mischief. Mischief. But let's go back to Preston Singletary just for a minute and looking at these incredible baskets that he renders in glass, thinking about the detail and the processes that he goes through to get those textures and colors that we see in historical examples in museums and private collections all around the country. Really an incredibly versatile artist, and thinking about the kinds of inspirations, the kinds of things that inspire him, including these transformation masks, these sort of interactive, mobile transformation masks in which on the Northwest Coast and in many Native communities, there's an understanding that non-human beings are also persons and have spirits. So when the mask is closed, you see the image of Raven, but when that mask opens up, you see their spirit being, which is more human. And Singletary has rendered that in glass. As well as smaller scale objects like rattles, and not a really old one on the left, but definitely a traditional form that would have been carved out of wood and painted, and then Preston's piece in glass. But he's not the only Northwest Coast artist who works in this kind of context. So this kind of weaving is known as a chilkat weaving among the Tlingit of the Northwest Coast. And I wanted to show you a couple sort of process images. So these are really complicated objects to create. They're multi-colored. There's different kinds of materials that are woven in. And as you can see, to get this complex image, it is woven in as the piece is made. It's not embroidered on afterwards or painted on. It is woven in. It's part of the construction of the piece. So I wanted to put in this image so you get a sense of all the different sections and how the weaver has to kind of go back and forth among all these different sections. Well, where do those ideas and designs come from? These kinds of weavings are actually a collaboration between women who do the weaving traditionally and men who paint what are known as pattern boards. And so you see one here being put in front of a loom that will be used. And one of the things to notice about these pattern boards is that they're not, they don't include the entire pattern, but they don't have to because they're symmetrical. So it's kind of 2/3. You have this central image, you have the pattern over here, but it's the mirror image on the other side. So here's another example of a pattern board. And here are some skateboards by a young Northwest Coast artist named Rico World. So he's riffing off these images and these objects, these pattern boards, in his own way. Actually, he and his sister, Crystal Whirl, own a company called Trickster Company. And they put these traditional Northwest Coast designs on everything, on basketballs, on clothing, on yoga pants, on decks of cards. And not just on the outside or sort of the back side of the deck of cards, but look at the cards themselves, some of the face cards even. Really interesting, fun stuff, I think. Another artist, not from the Northwest Coast, we're going to move to the Southwest now. This artist, Thomas Breeze Marcus, is known for his paintings, both large and small. He's Tohono O'odham, or Pima, from southern Arizona, and Ponca from Oklahoma. And he is really intrigued by the line work and the bold geometric designs of traditional O'odham basketry. He comes from a long line of basket weavers, and so grew up seeing pieces like this, which he sort of riffs off of now when he paints records. You can see where he gets his inspiration. These are some of his much smaller scale objects. And he works really small scale. You can see his drawing pen here on the left to give you a sense of how big that is. But he works large scale too. So he was commissioned to decorate part of this skate park in west of Phoenix as well. And he's done various murals as well. This was actually at the Heard Museum in Phoenix. He was commissioned to create this piece. And you can see, the basket designs here and also her halo, as well as this is kind of his typical line work. A few years ago, he collaborated with a number of artists, including Rose Simpson. Remember that name, Rose Simpson. Oh, we got some claps already. To paint this car, which they called Frida, in honor of Frida Kahlo. This is Rose here, by the way. Anyway, Rose will come back in the story in just a little bit. Some other artists from the Southwest who, again, are inspired by traditional objects but really create their own spin on it. Virgil Ortiz, who's from Cochiti Pueblo in New Mexico. These figures on the left are from late early 1900s, these single human figures rendered in clay called monos, so single figures. And sometimes they were, they depicted sort of everyday people. Sometimes they depicted people who were outside the norm, circus performers, or were used to kind of comment on society, so social commentary. And here's a piece by Virgil, sort of riffing off of that sense. But thinking about circus performers, acrobats, so here's a couple of Virgil's pieces. And again, he's used that black and white. The white is clay, is a kind of clay. The black pigment is made from boiling wild spinach. And it's it's not as easy as just boiling it. Apparently it takes like 5 days to make that pigment that has been used for thousands of years on Pueblo pottery. And he sources all his own clay. He doesn't go to Michael's or Hobby Lobby to get clay. He sources all his own clay. He comes from a long line of potters, and so they have knowledge of where's the best different colors of clay, when and where to harvest wild spinach, etc. So again, using these traditional forms, traditional materials and colors, but bringing them into the 21st century. And again, this is a historical piece, but you can see some of the geometric designs, and again, rendered in black and white, and some of the fashion that Virgil has created over the years, including on bags and bracelets, bed linens. I don't know if these are actually available. I kind of wish they were. He actually apprenticed with Donna Karan in New York for a while, so does some fashion design as well. As the ceramics. So he works in a variety of media, and again, drawing on tradition, but definitely a contemporary spin. Another Pueblo artist who's doing some interesting work with ceramics, Jason Garcia, who's from Santa Clara, Pueblo. He again comes from a long line of potters. He sources all his own materials, and thinking about these historical ceramic tiles that many Pueblo people made with these abstract images of cachinas, of spirit beings in the Pueblo religious tradition. His figures are not so traditional. She has a flip phone, so that's traditional now, right? But at least early 21st century. So riffing off of that. He also has always loved comic books, or I should say graphic novels, right? He's actually a printmaker. He earned his MFA from the University of Wisconsin. So he combines his knowledge of Pueblo history, his interest in printmaking and ceramics into these kinds of images. So you'll notice on this piece, there's a date of fall of 1598 and August of 1680. He's referencing specific historical events in Pueblo history. And in particular, 1680, the Pueblo Revolt, which was led by a leader named Pope against Spanish invaders. But he does them in this graphic novel style. So again, he's looking to history not just in terms of traditional aesthetics and materials and techniques, but specific events, but bringing them up to date. thinking about military conflict, etc., and graphic novels. An artist from Tahlequah, Oklahoma, Roy Boney Jr., who's Cherokee Nation. He's really interested not only in artwork, but also in Cherokee language. He works for the nation to teach Cherokee language and to incorporate Cherokee language in all kinds of ways throughout the community. In fact, he's worked with Apple, Microsoft, and others to incorporate the Cherokee Syllabary, so their way of writing their language, into operating systems. So he and his friends and others can text in Cherokee Syllabary and post on Facebook in Cherokee Syllabary. So thinking about bringing that language up to the present. The photograph on the left is of a group of code talkers, Choctaw code talkers in World War I. Many people have heard of Navajo code talkers who served in World War II, but actually there were indigenous code talkers in both world wars and from various communities. So thinking about language, and particularly in the early 1900s, which was a time when government policies and schools, missionaries were all trying to restrict the use of native language. And yet military servicemen and women were using their language to the benefit of the military and U.S. society in wartime. The Cherokee Syllabary, this is one of my favorite Roy pieces. The Cherokee Syllabary was invented by Sequoyah in the late 1820s. Roy, among other things, loves the Simpsons, so why not Simpcoya? And again, mash up all of his interests in language and tradition and being Cherokee and the Simpsons. Another artist who actually you're going to get to hear sometime soon, Terry Greaves, who's Kiowa. Sorry? May 21st. Terry Greaves will be coming here. You must come back and hear her. She's brilliant. And she's one of the co-curators of the Hearts of Our People exhibition. She's Kiowa, so her relatives are originally from Oklahoma. She actually grew up on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, where her mother owned a trading post. She now lives in Santa Fe. But her beaded piece here, called Sovereign Citizens, and you see those two dates there, 1924 and 1948, and those soldiers in uniform. So those two dates are when Native people actually got the right to vote as U.S. citizens. Most Indian people were made citizens and allowed to vote in 1924, Indian Citizenship Act, but not Native people of Arizona and New Mexico. They were considered too Indian and not civilized enough to be allowed to vote until 1948, until after Navajo code talkers had helped use their native language to help the U.S. win the war. So this is not only an homage to the bravery of those Native people who volunteered in great numbers, but also reminding us it wasn't that long ago that Indigenous people were not allowed to vote in the U.S. And then this diptych that she did of Kiowa warriors, both in military uniform and in traditional Kiowa uniform as black leggings, so those who have served in the military, not just men, but women as well. Here's some of Terry's other work. These are not your grandma's beaded moccasins, but you can get a sense of the design elements and the style that inspired her with these particular pieces. And I'm sure she'll talk more about that later. Another artist, Dyani Whitehawk, who lives in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but her heritage is Lakota from the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. She's a painter, printmaker, and again is inspired by traditional clothing like moccasins, although she's not a beadworker. Again, she's a painter and printmaker. But looking at, I love this piece, Chantescuya, so Sweetheart. So we have women's moccasins and men's moccasins, so we've got sort of a couple represented there. But looking at this sort of checkerboard design of these moccasins, which we can find in historical examples in collections all over the country. And again, thinking about that inspiration of materials and techniques, this is a detail from a painting of Dyani's that is in this traveling show, Hearts of Our People. in which she's inspired by quill work, which is very labor-intensive and sort of dangerous. So quill work, porcupine quills. Anyone ever dealt with porcupine quills or porcupines? A couple people. So you know they have barbs on the end of them. It is not fun to do quill work. I apprenticed with a quill worker on Pine Ridge for a weekend during my stint out there, and I decided I'm not doing quill work. But I wanted to put up this detail shot of this historic piece. You can see the kind of cross-hatching of quill work here, and the quills dyed different colors, and get a sense of that sort of repetitive motion that she must undergo to paint on canvas. And you can get a sense, again, it's hard to tell, but multiple layers of color, sort of opaque whites and purples, to get that kind of natural feel of the variation of porcupine quills. And again, I'm not an artist, and there's no way I would have the patience, much less the creativity, to create something like that. But I'm really glad that Dyani has it and shares it with us. Another artist who is also in the Hearts of Our People exhibition, Jamie Okuma, who is Luiseño from California, but also Shoshone Bannock from Idaho. And she does a lot. She started off making what she calls soft sculptures. So miniature sculptures, dolls if you will, but they're really not meant to be played with. And she's gotten more into fashion. But again, thinking about what is inspiring her, these geometric shapes that we see painted onto these rawhide boxes known as parfleches, bright geometric designs that historically were painted by women, but she puts them on all kinds of things in the 21st century. These shoes are part of the Hearts of Our People exhibition. And again, not your grandma's beaded moccasins, although you can see, again, some of the inspiration of these bold geometric designs. And in particular, I love how these get tapered at the end, right? These long tapered design elements here. And in thinking about how Jamie has beaded and tapers things all around these Christian Louboutin shoes. These are actually her size. She said she has worn them once, but now they're in a museum collection. So I did want to give you a kind of a sneak peek of this traveling exhibition, Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists. You've seen some of the work by some of the women in this show. It opened in Minneapolis at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts this past summer in June. It traveled to the Frist Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. It is now being installed at the Renwick, which is part of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And this summer, as Patricia mentioned, it will come to the Philbrook in Tulsa. Please come see the show. It is the first of its kind in all sorts of ways. There have been a number of exhibitions of Native women's art. Almost all of them were contemporary. And this show really takes a long look at 1,000 years of Native women's art. And it is unusual for all kinds of reasons, not just in its depth of time and diversity of materials and styles illustrated, but it was actually art by committee. Jill Alberg-Yo, my colleague at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, had this idea to do this show and thought, I can't do this by myself. So she reached out to Terry Greaves, Kiowa beadworker, you saw some of her work, and said, have you ever heard of a show like this? That it's not just that it's Native women, but it's this incredible span of time. They started doing research, talking to colleagues, looking through the literature, never been done before. So they started coming up with an idea of what this sort of show would look like and what it would include. And very quickly they decided, there's no way the two of us can do this. We need help. So they decided to phone a few friends and put together a 21-person advisory board, I should say a 21-woman advisory board of Native and non-Native artists, curators, scholars, researchers, to come together to talk about what this show would be and what would be in it and how it would be organized. So this is our photo at the opening in Minneapolis. And one of the things that everyone was insistent upon is that it can't be the same old thing. This show, although it's 1,000 years, it should not be organized chronologically. We're not going to put the oldest thing over here and have this timeline marching forward in time to the most contemporary things. And also, it shouldn't be organized anthropologically or geographically by culture area and have the Southwest here, Northwest there. That was the challenge then. So how on earth are we going to organize 118 objects representing 1,000 years of Native art history? Well, together, the advisory board came up with these themes of legacy, relationships, and power to incorporate all of these incredible objects. And one of the other things that the advisory board was insistent upon from the very beginning is to have as much Native language as possible on the object labels. So we worked with communities and language departments like Roy Boney's at Cherokee Nation to translate as many of the object labels as possible. So the first section, Legacy, really looks at a couple of things. Incredible artists who really set the stage, like Maria Martinez in that piece on the left. And Dotsalali, also known as Louisa Kaiser, basket weaver from southern Nevada on the right. Dotsalali in particular, she was born about 1858, died in 1925. Even during her lifetime, her baskets would fetch thousands of dollars. Think about $2,000 in 1900. These days, her baskets are valued in the millions, and one of them is part of this exhibition. So these women who were known not only in their communities, but known to collectors, to museum curators, and around the world are, have set the stage and are legacies in and of themselves that contemporary artists continue to riff off of. The other aspect of legacy is that sense of generations and passing on these traditions. So the outfit on the left, the giveaway horses outfit, was made by these three women. 3 generations of an Assiniboine family from Montana. Joyce, the grandmother, Juanita, and Jessa Ray. And there is an interview with them as part of a video, and their interaction is just brilliant. So thinking about that kind of legacy. So the second section, relationships, looks at not only relationships among human beings, family relationships, tribal relationships, but also relationships between humans and the natural world and humans and the spirit world. So this basket on the left is actually part of the Philbrook collection. We have lent 3 objects to this traveling show. And these 2 ladies are the granddaughters of the maker of this basket. Susan Billie and her sister Madeline. And this was at the opening of the show in Minneapolis this past June. And Susan is also a basket maker, so she learned from her grandmother and great aunt and other relatives. And those are her miniature baskets right there. You can't hardly see them. But when we were in the show at the opening, it's so exciting, celebratory, et cetera, and Susan said to me, that's not the grandma's basket that I thought you were going to lend. I thought it was a different one on the checklist that we've been emailing about. And I said, oh, I know, we've got this other piece, but when the conservators looked at it, it had some damage, bugs got to the feathers, and we just didn't want to have it go on the road and be vulnerable like that. So we switched it out at the last minute. So we had this little conversation. I continue walking through the gallery, and all of a sudden my phone pings. And I get this picture from Susan. This is their grandmother, Susie Santiago Billie, with that basket at her kitchen table in Hopland, California in 1952. And she knew that basket. She knew she had seen it before. And that's their family photo. She had a snapshot of it. Thinking about those relationships that go on, and that we continue to learn about these historic collections and can name the makers and show their faces and give credit to these incredible artists who've been working in a variety of media over time is really special. And again, thinking about relationships between humans and the natural world. So this painting, which is like 5 by 8 feet, it's huge. And it's inspired by traditional beadwork, but it is actually a painting. It's bright, it's vibrant, it's beautiful. You see these plants and animals. The artist calls it the wisdom of the universe, and it represents all of the species of plants and animals in Canada that are extinct or endangered. And again, it's about this relationship that we continue to have. This is not about the past. This is about today and our relationship and responsibilities to the world and those around us. There are also objects that speak to spiritual relationships and that power of the spirit. This piece is another one from the Philbrook collection. It's, I'm supposed to wrap it up in a couple minutes. I think we're on time. It's actually from Oklahoma, made by an Oto artist. We don't have the name of the maker, but it's known as a Fawfaw coat. It's named after a man named William Fawfaw, who was an Oto religious leader. And in about 1880 or so, he fell ill and had a vision that if he performed this specific ceremony with these dances and these songs and had his whole community participate, that not only would he get better, but their tribe would thrive and would come back from some desperate circumstances they were in at the end of the 1800s. So he woke up from this dream, he got better, he was healed, he told people in his community about this ceremony, he taught these songs and dances, and the community started participating in it. And part of it, the leaders would wear these coats. And of course, it's a military style coat that they acquired in trade from non-natives. And those glass beads were not made by native people. They were mass produced in Eastern Europe and places like Czechoslovakia and traded to native people. But this ceremony all centered around a pine tree that would be collected from the woods and then brought to the community. But you couldn't cut down the tree or it would kill the spirit of it. You had to keep that spirit alive. And so the tree would be dug up with the roots intact and then replanted in the middle of the community. And then these ceremonies and songs would take place. And so you see the reflection of that ceremony in this coat. There are also objects that speak to diplomatic power as well. So these moccasins were made by Marguerite Vincent. I cannot pronounce her last name. I'm glad it's up there. But she was an expert moccasin maker. The embroidery there is silk thread and moose hair. And she was an exceptional craftsperson. She taught members of her family these embroidery techniques and others in her community. This particular pair of moccasins was given to one of the first colonial governors in Ontario, Canada, as a sort of treaty arrangement. So they were used in a diplomatic treaty and negotiation. A couple other examples of power. On the right, a painting by Joan Hill, who's from Oklahoma, women's voices at the council, and thinking about many Native communities are matrilineal. And actually, if anyone was here for Preston and Miranda's talk the other day, she talked about matrilineality and that although the men might be speakers on behalf of their families, communities, clans, they're saying what the women told them to say. And if they don't have that position for very long. And in many southeastern tribes, like Muskogee Creek and Cherokee, it's the same thing. So here we have, again, generations of women, including this young girl, who were talking in council and deciding some sort of decision for their community. They're not separate then, but they have voices at the council as well. And then this piece by Anita Fields, who's an Osage artist currently based in Tulsa, about all kinds of power. If you look closely at the bottom there, you'll see an oil. In thinking about the power of oil for all of us in the 21st century, but particularly for Osages, who have kept a lot of their land and mineral rights and so have benefited economically from this extractive industry. But what are the consequences of that? And one of her relatives there in this incredibly beautiful coat that she was commissioned to make for part of this exhibition. So again, thinking about the past, about history, about human relationships with the environment, etc. So one of the things about this exhibition that is really large and complex, this advisory board helped put it together. It was art by committee that actually worked. But the gallery space at Philbrook is smaller than the other gallery spaces. So the show was going to be smaller as well. And this sort of upset me. But luckily, co-curators Jill and Terry are incredibly generous and said, you know what, Oklahoma, being the home of 39 tribes, and the last stop on this national tour, you really should put some more Oklahoma stuff in there. You've got this great collection at Philbrook, so why don't you go ahead and make it more Oklahoma when it comes to Philbrook? And I said, great, thank you so much, that's awesome. And I started thinking about it, what would I put in? And then I stopped myself and said, okay, here's this exhibition that has been collaborative with Native women from the very beginning. There is no way that I, as a non-Native curator of Native art, is going to pick what Oklahoma things go into this exhibition. So I put together an Oklahoma advisory board of Indigenous women, Anita Fields, Mary Jo Watson, America Meredith, Ruthie Blaylock-Jones, and Juanita Podpony to join me and look through our collection. And here's some of our collection that we put out to choose the things that would go in at Philbrook only. So even if you've seen the show at any other venue, it's gonna be different when it comes to Philbrook. And by the way, remember I told you that name Rose Simpson? So this is Rose Simpson's 1985 Chevy El Camino that she named Maria in honor of Maria Martinez and her black on black pottery. Rose is not only a ceramic artist, sculptor extraordinaire, she's an auto mechanic. She did not just paint this car, she rebuilt the engine, she rebuilt the transmission. She redid the interior in black leather and suede to give you this black on black contrast of shiny and matte finish. She redid everything on this car, and it's coming to Tulsa, as is Rose. So, I wanted to share a little bit about my story and how I got here, and some of the contemporary Native artists who inspire me, who draw on the past, are inspired by the past, but express their own voices and visions in their work. And I hope you not only enjoyed the show of Preston Singletary's work and the pieces in your collection, but go out and look for some of these other folks' work as well, because it's fantastic. Thank you all very much.